Have you ever found yourself in a place where you think, there is no hope? I have tried everything. I have read everything. I have gone everywhere. I have prayed every prayer, and it seems as if my prayers never go any higher than the ceiling. If today you find yourself in a place of despair and darkness, I want to invite you to join me on this program, and you'll discover that God is still moving, that God sees you, and that you are loved. When did you begin to think things were not going well in your marriage?
It was in 2013. And, at first I could pin it to other things. We had 5 children, and so that's a very busy household. And some of our kids were, graduating, going off to college. And so I just at first attribute it to there's lots of transition happening, and, sometimes it's hard. And then, my ex-husband was experiencing, a significant birthday. And so I thought, well, maybe it's just that he's kind of hit that place where he's feeling like he's getting, older than he would like to be or whatever. So I always had things that I could attribute what I was feeling and sensing to that were a whole lot less severe than what was actually happening. And I didn't find out for sure what was happening. I got through 2013, 2014, 2015. But I knew just there was something, it was like an undercurrent of turmoil that I wasn't used to, and that made me very, very, very anxious. And at the same time, I think he was trying to convince me that I was the crazy one. And so every time I would ask questions, he would just say things like, Lysa, we really need to work on your mental health and stuff. And so I now know that the counseling term for that is gaslighting. I didn't know it then. And then in early 2016, the day of my oldest daughter's rehearsal dinner, I found out for sure that he was having an affair. I really do think that my body just went into shutdown mode. I knew I had to get through the wedding for my daughter, and so I did, but I was in a complete fog. I was smiling on the outside while I was screaming on the inside, just desperate to wake up and have this all be a bad dream, but it wasn't, it was real.
Not only that, but it wasn't something he was willing to walk away from. Where is God in all? Because I'm thinking of people who are thinking right now, yeah, that is my story. Where is God when he's not answering your prayers in a way that makes sense?
Well, it's a lot easier for me to answer that question now. If you would have interviewed me that day, I would have said, I have no idea where God is, and I think it's okay to be that honest and that terrified and that broken. But here's what I know to be absolutely true. We don't serve a do-nothing God. God is always doing something, and that something is always pointed in the direction of good. And I could not see the good in that season. It was impossible for me to see the good in that season. But what I could do is trace God's hand of faithfulness behind me. And I could remember other circumstances where God was good, circumstances I didn't know how I was going to get out of. And so that didn't fully comfort me, but it did remind me that I may not see the hand of God moving in the way that I think it should, but that doesn't mean God isn't moving. It just may mean he's doing something different. And what I was so desperate for was for God's hand to move in a direction of complete reconciliation between me and my husband. But instead, God's hand was moving, but it became a rescue, and he rescued me out. And I do think sometimes God rescues us out of relationships. Sometimes God, creates a reconciliation opportunity. But for that reconciliation to take place, both people have to work toward reconciliation. There has to be repentance. There has to be a complete turnaround. The behavior that got you into that brokenness cannot be the behavior that will get you out of it, And I remember the day that I got the divorce papers from my attorney, And I didn't know what emotion to have at that point.
Sure.
You know, it's like, do I cry? Do I thank God for rescuing me out? Do I grieve the loss of a nearly 30-year marriage? And the answer is yes, all of the above.
I've often wondered, because I know what the Christian community can be like. You know, we can be incredibly supportive and understanding, and we can be brutal with one another. I remember posting a comment on Instagram one day, a fairly insipid comment, simply saying that it was the day when Joe Biden's son, Beau, finally passed from his cancer. And being a mom of just one boy, it broke my heart. And all I posted was praying today for the Biden family. I got annihilated online by believers saying, you know, this is, how can you pray for a man like that? And I'm like, it kind of blew my mind. But I've often wondered for you, you know, we have these things within the church where these are the regular sins that we all do, and these are the big no-nos.
Right.
So how did you navigate those waters of people who hold you in such high esteem, believing that you shouldn't have got divorced?
Well, it wasn't easy, you know. I mean, I was already suffering so much heartbreak on my own, and then to add on top of that, you know, people, well-meaning people, but people putting pressure on me. Lisa, if you get a divorce, you're basically giving permission to a whole generation of women to also divorce their husbands. And I just thought, well, first of all, I'm not that powerful. Second of all, I'm absolutely not giving permission to anyone. And third of all, I'm just trying to survive a story that I didn't want. I didn't want this divorce. I didn't see it coming, and there was nothing that I could do to change him. If I had power to change another person, I would have. Yeah. But all I had to do was, you know, all I could do was to save myself and save my sanity. And you know, I did a lot of research around what helps kids be resilient after something as tragic as a divorce. And the research shows that the number one thing that can help a child be resilient past a divorce, especially an unwanted divorce like mine was, is to have one healthy, stable parent. And if I wanted to be healthy and I wanted to be stable, then I could no longer participate in the dysfunction that was going to take both of us out if I didn't get out.
You mentioned 5 children, and 2 are adopted. Am I correct in that? 2 darling boys are adopted. How do you help your children in that process? Because I think it's something that, it's the same as, you know my story. My story is to do more with mental illness, which doesn't just impact me, it impacts our family. It impacts my husband, it impacts our son. And I was trying to think, what would that have been like for you in the midst of your own overwhelming grief? Because what people probably don't understand is the years that you tried, the year after year of extended grace and forgiveness. How do you help your children? What do you say to them when they don't understand?
I think when the trauma is not just one trauma, but it's over and over and over, and it's this trauma and then that trauma and then this one. And my kids were of the age where it's not like I could sort of hide some of the impact of all of this from them. And so unfortunately they were knee deep in the trauma with me, not because I pulled them in there, but because they were very aware of what was going on. And so I don't know that I did it all right, but I can tell you a couple of things that I did right. And one is I made a commitment to my kids that if they had questions, I would answer them truthfully. But I also made a commitment to them that I wouldn't continue to talk about things beyond what their questions needed. And they even asked me as a very healthy boundary, they said, please don't talk about our dad unless we ask you questions. And, you know, I think part of that is I could get a divorce, but they were not in that situation, you know, that they can't divorce their dad. And so I respected that boundary, and I think that was a really good, healthy thing. So I don't know that I did it all right, but I would say those conversations were important, and also getting good counseling and making that available to my kids so that they didn't always feel like they had to process it amongst themselves or process it with me, that they could go in a neutral environment and someone who was trained with how to heal from trauma. Giving them access to that was really important too.
How did you deal with the anger? Because I was trying, which is impossible, to put myself in your place, knowing some of the behind the story details of how awful it was at times. What do you do with that? Or were you angry, or were you more grief-stricken? But how do you handle that?
I think I was shocked. That was my primary emotion. And I remember going into my counselor and I kept saying, I just can't believe this. And then next week, I just can't believe this. And then the next week, I just can't believe it. And finally my counselor says, really? You can't believe it? Because pretty much this has been a pattern now where I think you should believe it. And he helped ease me to the place where I understood mental health as a commitment to reality at all costs. Wow. And so part of my struggle was I wanted to and I needed to feel all the feelings for sure. But I also knew that while those feelings could indicate things that I needed to address, I didn't want them to dictate how I suddenly lived my life. And so I could feel angry, and boy did I feel angry sometimes. But I didn't have to live as an angry person. Easier said than done, obviously, and I would give myself lots and lots of grace for certain moments that it was just a flood of emotion and that was it. But I also knew from almost the very beginning of this that it was not going to be something I could get over. It was something that I was going to have to walk through. Yeah. And there were not going to be any shortcuts. And I'm thankful that I had wise people around me to give me some really crucial nuggets of advice that were very, very important. And one was my counselor. His name is Jim Kress. He's amazing. But he one time said, Lysa, a sign of true healing is that you can go home and sit in the quiet alone with your own thoughts and be okay. And I really did not like that answer because I thought that's the last thing I want to do is go home and sit alone with my thoughts. But it was absolutely important because it allowed me space to identify what I was really feeling. And those feelings became pointers of the healing that needed to take place. And so those feelings were like the indicator lights on a dashboard. Yeah. And I had to be committed that what I was walking through, this really was as bad as what I thought it was. And these feelings were real. And I didn't want to get swept away with the feelings, but I definitely wanted to pay attention to them because we have to feel the pain if we're ever going to be able to deal with the pain. And we have to deal with the pain if we're ever going to heal from the pain.
And so, from that place, one of the phrases that I always think of when I think of you and your journey is, I believe that you have, and honestly it brings tears to my eyes, that you have stewarded your suffering well. There's a difference between walking through suffering and stewarding your suffering. You have allowed the Lord to take the very things that have broken you and you have lifted them up, and you have allowed God's love to flow through these broken places to other women. And for that, on behalf of everyone, thank you. So now we have this new book, and it's called Good Boundaries and Goodbyes, Loving Others Without Losing the Best of Who You Are. First of all, would you just help us understand, how do you define what is a boundary?
Well, thank you for your sweet words too, Sheila. I appreciate you saying that. That has been my prayer, to steward well. And honestly, this book is part of that, because a boundary, I think sometimes we think of boundaries as an attempt to shove another person away, or to control another person who seems a little bit out of control, or to fix an issue that we know needs to be fixed, but we can't figure out exactly how to communicate it. And so it's just like, okay, well then let me just create a separation with this person so I don't really have to deal with what's the real issue here. That's not a boundary. A boundary is a wonderful communication tool for us to establish what is and is not okay in that relationship, what we do and what we do not have to give in that relationship, and what we can and cannot tolerate in that relationship. Now, obviously, we need to check ourselves, because sometimes we can just be selfish, and like, I don't have that to give, well, that's great. It's Christmas morning and there's a pile of dishes. I'm sorry that you don't have that to give, but we all need to participate, right? That may or may not have been a boundary that one of my children tried to draw with me. But I think the boundary is this opportunity for us to communicate so we avoid extremes. The extreme over here is that somebody's doing something and it's creating a lot of wear and tear in the relationship. It's making me feel worn down and worn out. And so over here, I take it and I take it and I take it and I take it and I take it. Until one day I jump to the other extreme and say, I just can't take it anymore, I'm done. So a boundary helps us bring things back to the middle and avoid extremes, where we learn how to communicate effectively, like I said, what is and is not acceptable, what we do and do not have to give. And when we do it, and we do it in healthy ways, the boundary actually should be a way that we can fight for our relationships to stay healthy.
I can imagine a lot of Christian women. In fact, when I spent a month in a psych hospital, I talked to some women like this who believed. One woman had been so severely physically abused by her husband. He'd broken her jaw, he'd broken her leg. I mean, she'd been through so much, but she believed if she drew a boundary, and stepped away even for a time, that was not the Christian thing to do. Why do you think we get so confused as believers? Because you say in your book, boundaries are that's not our idea. Boundaries are God's idea.
Well, one scripture I like to point out, that there's many scriptures that I think can kind of feed this notion of like, is it okay to draw a boundary? But one of them is where Jesus teaches us and models that we're to lay down our life for our friends, right? And Jesus did do that. He did lay down his life for other people, for all of us. But Jesus laid down his one life to accomplish a high and holy purpose. Jesus did not lay down his life to enable bad behavior to continue. And so I think we must not confuse the good command to love with the bad behavior of enabling choices that really are not going to benefit either one of you. I think sometimes we can get caught in this dysfunctional dance where we get afraid. If I draw a boundary, then this person is going to take something from me that I don't want them to take. So instead of drawing the boundary, I just deal with the pain of whatever the behavior is. Maybe it's because I'm afraid if I draw a boundary, they're going to reject me, or they're going to be epically disappointed in me, or they're going to walk away from me. Well, the thing is, if by drawing a healthy boundary, if that's the kind of person that would have the reaction to reject you, walk away from you, just be disappointed in you, then chances are they're going to be those things, whether you draw the boundary or not. So our job isn't to control them. Our job is to keep ourselves self-controlled and stable and sane in the process. God never called us to control other people, but the evidence, one fruit of the evidence of God's Spirit in us is self-control. And so I think it's important that we understand, we draw the boundaries so that we can remain in control despite how out of control another person gets.
Are boundaries appropriate in families with, like, say with your children? Some of the comments I got recently when I asked a question, what's the hardest thing you're dealing with right now, and how can Barry and I pray for you, was, my kids are totally out of control. I've raised them to go to church, they don't care anymore. How do you apply good boundaries with children?
Well, we have to always think about age appropriateness, and we do have a responsibility as a parent. It's not like, okay, I'm going to draw this boundary, and so because you refuse to clean your dishes at night, I'm no longer going to provide food for you. I mean, that's probably not going to work, because you do have the responsibility to care well for your children. But I do think that age appropriately, letting your children suffer the consequences of their choices is so much better than you stepping in and saying, don't do this, but then rescuing them from the consequences of that choice. Because if they never feel the consequences of their own choices, then they're not going to have the appropriate self-motivation to change their behavior. I like to think of it like this. Like if you and I were here today and one of us had a cardiac event, the other one surely would jump in and do CPR. Right. And using external pressure, I could sustain your life for a little while, right? But at some point, if your heart does not beat and quicken and just start to pump on its own, I can't permanently sustain your life using external pressure trying to get your heart to change. You're going to be super frustrated if you just try to put a boundary on them to force them to change. What we have to do is change our mindset. We put a boundary on ourselves so that we reduce the access that we grant that person to our limited areas of capacity. I'm not supposed to control another person, but I am responsible to control me.
I love this, and this is what you were kind of touching on. You say love can be unconditional, but relational access never should be. Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
Well, again, when I was reading through the Bible, asking the question, is God okay with boundaries? Which, by the way, God established the foundations of the world in Genesis 1 by separating. In other words, creating boundaries between light and darkness, dry land and the water, right? Then we get into Genesis 2. Of all the topics that God could have chosen to be the subject matter of the first conversation recorded between God and man, God chose the topic of a boundary. Wow. And he said, you're free to eat from all these trees in the garden, but you must not eat from this one tree or else you will die. And so by the time I kept studying, is God okay with boundaries? By the time I got to the way that God establishes the temple, God gives certain people certain access in the temple, but not all people all access. And it wasn't because he loved this group of people more than this group of people, it's that he required different levels of responsibility. Wow. And so the more access you were granted, the more responsibility that you had to demonstrate to have that kind of access. The greatest access was given to the high priest once a year to go into the Holy of Holies. But that high level of access required a very high level of responsibility, or else the priest, if he wasn't perfectly cleansed and had on the right garments and all the stuff, then he would drop dead. He would suffer the greatest consequence. And so those two words really grabbed my attention, access and responsibility. Here's where I was getting it wrong. I was giving level 10 access to people without requiring level 10 responsibility. Now, when I say access, I mean access to my areas of limited capacity. I have limited time capacity, financial capacity, relational capacity, energy capacity, right? So I've got limited areas of capacity, not because I'm selfish, but because I'm human. Only God has unlimited capacity. Yeah. And when we try to act like we have unlimited capacity, we're actually trying to act like we're God, and we're not. And so we're already doing this really well in some areas of our life. Like, we know if we give level 10 access to all people by handing out our financial information, like today if I said, Sheila, what's your bank account number and what's your passcode? You would probably say back to me, I'm not sharing that, right?
Probably, yes.
Why? Is it because you're unchristian? No, it's because what? You have limited finances in your bank account. So you cannot give level 10 access to your bank account unless you make sure people demonstrate level 10 responsibility to have that kind of access. So here's where I was getting it wrong. I was giving level 10 access. They were only bringing level 3 responsibility. I can have a conversation asking them to be more responsible, but if they are unwilling or incapable, trying to force them to be more responsible with the external pressure of putting a boundary on them, it's not going to work. So I put the boundary on myself, and I reduce the access I grant them down to level 3, which is their demonstrated level of responsibility.
Wow. What would you say to somebody who's listening in? And I mean, I remember the first time I read Henry Cloud's book, Changes That Heal. It was like these bells were going off inside of me, like, you know, warning, red flags. What would you say to somebody who's going to read Good Boundaries and Goodbyes to even know where to start? Because it's kind of scary if you've never lived that way. It
is. Well, first of all, I would say I have a lot of scripts in the book. And these aren't just hard and horrific things. You know, these are going to really help save your sanity. So one example is we all get requests, and we see this request come up and we think, oh, inside my heart, inside my gut, I know I should say no. But then suddenly my mouth says yes. Or suddenly I type yes, of course, you know. And so that's a good way to practice boundaries when you know something is a no, because again, you have limited capacity. You can check yourself. Am I saying no because I'm being selfish? Yeah. So if you're being selfish, then yeah, maybe adjust. But if it's because you're being honest about your limitations, here's a simple script. While my heart says yes, 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 the reality of my time makes this a no. Thank you for understanding.
That's excellent, and I will be using that a lot in the future.
Just don't really, use it on me, right?
Never on you, never, never, never. No. But really think of the number of people who end up doing things and actually really resenting it because the answer should have been no, but they felt this person will like me more if I say yes. Mm-hmm. And usually it doesn't end up that way. They don't like you more, they just got, you know, what they needed from you.
Right. Or we say yes because, again, we may be concerned, what will this person take from me if I say no? And whatever it is that we're getting from them, maybe it's support, maybe it's being liked by them, maybe it's, you know, accolades or attaboys or whatever, you know, opportunity. So us saying no to that person, I think sometimes makes us afraid they're going to take from us whatever they're giving to us that we feel we have to have. And so here's the way that I would think about it. Is it possible that too many of us are desperately wanting from other people things that we really should be getting from the Lord? Like, I think I will always desperately want things from other people in those exact areas that I fear God will not provide for me. And so then it's hard for me to say no, because then I lose control of that situation, right? And I think the other part of this that we have to think about is just take a step back from it all. And if I were to say, okay, Sheila, pull out your journal today, and on one side write, this is who Sheila is when she's at her best. When she's balanced, she's got enough sleep, you know, she's really paid attention to her limited capacity, and she's not hyperextending or bankrupting her capacity. So what does Sheila look like? She's amazingly kind. She is generous. She's loving. She's interested in other people. So you would list all these great qualities because you have so many. But then I would challenge you, okay, Sheila, on the other side of the page, write down what Sheila looks like when she's worn out, worn down, frazzled, or fractured.
Ask my husband.
But, you know,
I know what you're saying.
These two different versions of ourselves. Now ask the question, which version of myself do I want to be front and center in my life? Well, I want to be the best version of myself. Therefore, I'm responsible to make sure that I don't get into a position where I'm giving so much or sacrificing so much that I get bitter and resentful and angry and withdrawn, or whatever those qualities are that are the worst versions of ourselves. That's what it means to draw a boundary, not to shove other people away, but it's so that we can love others well without losing the best of who we are.
I love that. That is so helpful. So let's just get to the other bit, good boundaries and goodbyes. When do we know it's time to say goodbye to something or someone in our life?
Well, I always say take steps, not leaps.
Yeah, I love you said that.
You know, obviously, if you're in physical danger, then you need to get away right away. But if it's a scenario where it's a process to get to this goodbye, just take steps. And one appropriate step is to get a board of directors around you. And that doesn't mean that you have to have an organization. I have a personal board of directors. And these are people in my life that can speak truth to me. They can walk beside me. They know the depth of the struggles that I've been through, and they can help me think biblically. And I can borrow some of their wisdom when I feel like I'm shaky in my own, or I can borrow some of their faith when I feel like my faith is really getting worn down right now, or whatever it is. But these people, and it doesn't have to be 10 people, it could be just a few people, but it includes a friend of mine who knows the Bible inside and out, and who can help me dig into scriptures and find the answers that I need. And then it also includes my therapist, Jim Crest. It's really, really important.
His wisdom throughout the book is incredible.
Yes, I thought that was going to be absolutely crucial to have that. And then 2 dear friends that they do life with me every day. I cannot hide from them. They are aware of me, what I'm doing, what I'm thinking, what I'm going through from the morning, early in the morning to late at night. We all have each other, we track each other, so we all have our locations and everything. So these are like dear, dear friends. And so this group of people really help me when I have to make the harder decisions. And that's one reason I started Therapy and Theology, the podcast that we do, is because maybe you don't have access to a friend who can give you Bible answers to some of your deep questions, or maybe you don't have a therapist yet. Well, the podcast that I started with a theologian and my own therapist helps provide that for people until they can possibly find a therapist on their own.
How do people find that podcast? Is that simply what it's called?
Anywhere, yep, it's called Therapy and Theology with Lysa TerKeurst. So anywhere podcasts are, you can find it.
Oh, I love that. Because honestly, I so agree with that. I have 3 women in my life that I call my safe sisters. And it was really life-saving when the first year of COVID. At first I actually thought it was great because I stayed in my pajamas all day and watched the Great British Baking Show, until we started to
watched that too.
Oh gosh. But then I found myself spiraling again with depression. And we have this thing that we get on these Zoom calls with each other because I've tried to move it to phone calls so that I don't have to care what my face looks like. And they're like, nope, get on the Zoom call. We want to look in your eyes. And there were several times during those months when I'd be like, you know what, girls, I'm not joining today. And they were like, Sheila, sit down in the chair and hit this button now. And really and part of it was them reminding me of what's always true, no matter what might be true for a moment. So I cannot endorse what you said more highly. It's so important because the enemy looks for who he can devour. I remember when I was in Africa watching these beautiful gazelles and impala, and they would be just racing together as a team. And then one evening when we're coming back from something, there's one by itself, which is something I'd never seen. And we stopped the Jeep, and I asked the guy who was our guide, why is that? Why is he standing all by himself? Why is he not moving? And he said, you need to look over in that bush. And I look over, and there's a lion. And within seconds, that darling little animal was taken out. And the irony is that animal, that gazelle, can run faster than the lion, but it was frozen in fear. And I think that's what happens to a lot of us as believers because we're not part of community, because we don't have. I read a thing this morning on Instagram from Lisa Whittle where she said, your heart can love everyone, but not everyone can get in your car. We need to have those few people, a few girls, a few safe sisters, safe brothers who know us well enough to ask how we're doing and know when we're not telling the truth. But I wanted to ask you, I know how much time and energy you put into writing. You've helped me writing my books. You've helped so many other people. It's very intentional with you. So when you finished this book, how did that feel for you?
Well, it felt like closing a part of my life that I wanted to close. I was ready for it to close. The book ends with that moment where I'm standing in my closet and looking at my wedding ring. And I just kept thinking, I don't know what to do with my wedding ring. I didn't want to take it off, and yet it was time. And so a few weeks before that, I'd been given, a friend of mine from college had found in an old box of books that she was going through from college. I hadn't seen her in 30 years. And she found my childhood Bible. I have no idea how my childhood Bible got put in a box of her college books, but somehow she had it, and she figured out a way to give it to this person who gave it to this person, who eventually it made its way to me. And it was fascinating to open it up and read things written in my childhood handwriting. But some of those statements that I'd written as a child were so profound that it was almost like I was back then writing messages to myself today. And one of the things I had written in my little girl handwriting was, God would never want you to be married to a husband who loves more than you, more women than you. And God doesn't want your heart to be divided toward him either. And so I had it open to that page. And so I took my wedding ring and I tucked it in the pages of that childhood Bible, and I closed it and I put it high on a shelf in my closet. And I thought, this is just really like two bookends of my life. One, a little girl who had so many hopes and dreams for what her life would look like. And then now, my 50-year-old self, and life doesn't look at all like I thought it would, but there are parts of my life that look so much better than I would have ever envisioned. And there are parts that, are part of my story, but it's not my whole story. And then there's still a lot of life to look forward to. And so I just remember putting my ring there and knowing I don't want to close this and put it away yet until I can authentically say goodbye without good riddance. And so I thought of my ex-husband, and the original word goodbye, it started off as God be with ye. That was the original meaning of goodbye. And then it was shortened to good, B-Y-E, and then it was shortened to just goodbye. And so then I just stood there, and with sorrow and with newfound hope, both in my heart, and I can carry both. I wanted to say goodbye, goodbye. God be with you. Goodbye.
That is profound. I want to ask you, would you pray for our viewers, for people who are leaning closer to the television set because everything you're sharing is touching them deeply?
Well, let me speak first to our listeners. I want to say, I would imagine in whatever you're walking through today, whether your circumstances are like mine or not, the sorrow, the undercurrent of sorrow is the same. And I know what it feels like. I know what it feels like to wake up and want to feel the joy of the morning, but feel the dread of the day. I know what it feels like to look at your life and think, I have hope for my future, but today feels so scary. I just don't know how to get through today. I know what that feels like. And I just want to remind you, you're not alone, and that there are more people and more resources out there to help you than you've got problems. So don't sit alone. Don't get in isolation like you were saying, Sheila, and just remember that there are others out there and there are resources that can help you, so take advantage of that. All right, let me pray. Lord, I just pray right now for the woman that is listening, or for the man that is listening, who feels as though all hope has been lost. I pray that you would give them a glimpse today of just one evidence of your goodness and your faithfulness. Maybe it's just the warmth of the sun on their face, or maybe it's an unexpected smile from a stranger, Or maybe, Lord, it's running into someone who says something profound to us that we weren't expecting. Whatever it is, Lord, I pray that we would become, even in the middle of our sorrow, that we would become a noticer of your goodness and your faithfulness, because when we notice your goodness and we notice your faithfulness, we are reminded that you are right here with us. So, Lord, give us that, and that can be the joy and the hope that we hold on to for today. As long as we know you're with us, then we are not alone. And when you are with us, Lord, good is there as well. In your holy name we pray. Amen.